created in 2022 to help share capacity with early childhood leaders across the country on embedding family and parent leadership as their new way of working. The center's work builds on decades of experience that ECIC has with authentically engaging family leaders to inform and shape the early childhood system. Please visit our website for more information on how to connect with us and find resources on family and parent leadership. We are super excited for today's webinar, which again is focused on restorative practices and building trust when harm is caused. We know that all of our work in family and parent leadership is relationship-based, and that it's important to approach our relationships with being intentional. And so we have some awesome panelists and an awesome moderator who will be joining us today and talking through why focusing on restorative relationships is crucial to our work. And so to help us get warmed up in today's discussion, we're going to drop a reflection question in the chat. And so I'll also review that real quick. And so in our experience, what are some barriers that make it difficult for system leaders and family leaders to build trusting relationships? And so in our experience, what are some barriers that make it difficult for system leaders and family leaders to build trusting relationships? So now I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Brooke Albert, who is a former consultant with the Early Childhood Investment Corporation. Ms. Albert has an extensive background serving children and families in a variety of settings, and is someone who has demonstrated through her life and through her work a commitment to restorative practices and being trauma-informed in her work and relationships. Welcome, Brooke. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jacob, for that kind introduction. Yeah, I see that the chat is disabled, so we welcome you to share your answers to that reflection question in the Q&A. You're absolutely welcome to do that, and our panelists will be joining us in just a second. Welcome to you all. Good day to you wherever you're joining us from today. As Jacob shared, my name is Brooke Albert, and I'm here today as a consultant with the National Center for Family and Parent Leadership, powered by the Early Childhood Investment Corporation. I am also a parent. I have 3 children, one who is in preschool, and we access and have accessed services through multiple entry points in our social systems to meet our family's needs. I was first exposed to restorative practices during my work in the K-12 public education system, and it was through my experience implementing it in our district and really living it that I connected more deeply with my purpose and passion for the world and became a strong advocate for it in every context. And as Jacob mentioned, I feel especially passionate about the opportunity for social systems to become active agents of healing in our world through restorative practices. So for me, it is truly a gift to be here moderating today's webinar. Just so you know what to expect with the short time that we have today, our goals are really to highlight the lived experiences of our amazing panelists in their use of restorative practices as a tool to build trusting relationships and repair harm, and to offer some recommendations for how early childhood system and organization leaders can engage restoratively in their family and parent leadership work. And so again, as Jacob mentioned, we are incredibly honored to have 3 experts here in the space with us today. And I am going to take a moment to just introduce them briefly. And if you all wouldn't mind just lifting a hand so that the audience knows who is who as I share your name and your role. It is my pleasure to introduce these panelists. Each one of them have a powerful perspective on working restoratively within social systems, and you'll be able to access each of their bios in the resource attachments that will be coming your way. So today we have with us Amy Lawrence, who is a parent leader and the Family Resources Coordinator with Child Strive. We have Steve Kaur, the Director and Subject Matter Expert in Restorative Practices with ACOBEN. And last but certainly not least, we have Henry McClendon, the Director of Community Engagement with the International Institute for Restorative Practices, also known as the IIRP. So what I would like to do is take a step back for a moment and invite our panelists' voices into the space today by asking each of you to share with us what drew you to this webinar. Why did you want to be part of today's discussion on restorative practices in the context of family and parent leadership? So Amy, I'll start with you.
She's muted.
Oh, Amy, you're muted. No worries.
Somebody had to do it. Somebody had to do it.
Here we go. Can you hear
There
me?
you go.
All right. I wanted to be part of this panel because I want to live in a world where, and I want to raise my children in a world where systems and institutions are held accountable for the harm they've caused. I want to see both sides being able to heal and move forward in a healthy, lasting way.
Thank you so much, Amy. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here and wanted to be a part of this because I deeply believe in the power of connection, community, and relationship to lead towards outcomes that we are all looking for. And I certainly believe that in the current context, we're talking more about collaboration and partnership. So I think this specific conversation is desperately needed, and this is the time for it.
Thank you, Steve. What about you, Henry?
Hi, thanks, Brooke. Yeah, I've been around, been involved with the restorative practice since around 2007. And so I look forward to any opportunity to encourage people who are practitioners and to introduce restorative practices to folks who are unfamiliar. I've seen it work in such a positive way in schools, communities. So I'm a strong advocate for this. So thanks for having us.
Thank you all so much. We are looking forward to learning from your collective wisdom today. So a quick note to our audience, we realize that there are many different paths that we could take to explore today's topic, and that with just under an hour, we won't be able to cover them all. What we hope is that with what you hear and learn today, you'll be able to take a step forward in your journey to becoming really a more restorative human, not just in your professional role, but really in every area of your life. And so we have a handful of questions lined up for our panelists, and we hope to have a few minutes for question and response at the end of this conversation. And so with that in mind, we encourage you to engage with us today, to share your reactions, to drop your comments and questions in the Q&A feature. We want to know what you're thinking about and what's lifting for you as we have this conversation. And so with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in, starting with you, Amy. We opened our webinar with this reflection question that acknowledged that across the system, there are significant barriers to building trusting relationships. So Amy, from your perspective as a parent leader, what are some of the barriers that make it difficult to build trusting relationships with leaders in social systems and institutions?
The first and biggest barrier, I think, is the power imbalance. Institutions, they can make their own rules, they can change those rules, and they're not necessarily accountable to the people that they serve. This makes people feel powerless and resentful. And how can you trust something that feels so arbitrary and you don't know where it's coming from? The next is the lack of transparency. How are you funded? Who makes your decisions, especially in situations where there's continual, even generational harm? Transparency is paramount. And lastly, I'd like to talk about logistics. Location and language matter. If you don't have a strong outreach team or a strong media presence or an easy to locate office, it's going to be hard for people to find you. If you do not have interpreters that speak the languages of your community, your message will be lost.
Wow. Thank you, Amy. You just shared that packed a powerful punch with a number of really powerful and very salient barriers. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Steve, I'd like to pass it to you from your perspective, especially thinking about your experience as an administrator kind of in the system. What are some barriers that make it difficult to build trusting relationships with parents and families?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the things, and Amy mentioned it, that there is potentially even a generational distrust, right, of various social systems and educational systems because of how people have been potentially treated in the past and the stories that they share. And we, as system leaders or those that are involved with the system, need to understand that we are representatives of that, even though maybe some of those exact same situations and those stories would not be anything that we would be interested in continuing or even being a part of, but we must understand and accept the responsibility that we are representatives of those systems. And so that is what the people that we work with may potentially bring to the situation. And instead of kind of taking that personally, maybe getting a little bit defensive, understand that and work through that. Um, I also think one of the barriers is there are systemic legal factors to the way that systems, and particularly schools. A lot of my background is in schools, of the information that we can share with people. And so I've worked with many people, including myself and others that I've worked with, who desperately would like to engage more and share some things, but we're told the system says that you can't do that, right? And so when you're working within a system that has expediency as its primary thing, it's really difficult to bring in those connection relational dynamics. I also think it's important to understand that just because it's a job does not mean that people don't care. Just because you're getting paid doesn't mean that you don't care, right? And so sometimes I think, it's, oh, you're just the system, and people on the system side, if you will, feel like, no, I really do care, and it really does matter to me, and I would like to be able to fully engage with you.
Yeah, thank you both. Both of those things, or both of your perspectives, I should say, are certainly mirrored and aligned with the feedback that we've gotten from our audience today as well. So we know that this is a thing. This is challenging. There are barriers across the system from all the points of engagement that we deal with every single day. So I'm going to ask our panelists to share what is one restorative practice that families and system leaders can put into action to overcome these barriers and build relationships that lead to the healing and repairing of harm. Henry, we'll start with you. Oh, Henry, I think you're muted. The technology is a real thing. Speaking of barriers, right? So, Henry, I will circle back around to you once your sound gets straightened out. So, Amy, from your perspective, what is one restorative practice that our folks who are listening or watching our recording can put into practice to kind of overcome these barriers?
I think focusing on the root problem, not just the symptoms. On the surface, it seems simple, but at the core, it means not only looking at how things are now, but how things could be. For instance, maybe, in your workplace, your data shows that your diverse hiring initiative is favoring Asian candidates over Indigenous ones. On the surface, the solution seems, well, hire more Indigenous candidates, and that's part of it. But if we go deeper, we can ask, well, what is our ideal situation? Maybe it's creating a hiring process where race and ethnicity can't come into play. Maybe it's restructuring your workplace to allow for more equity. Any way you look at it, addressing the actual needs, not just reacting to issues as they pop up, is the way forward.
Thank you so much, Amy. That is a really powerful perspective. And I'm curious, with your experience, how might you recommend leaders kind of engaging families and parents in figuring out the root cause?
Having a group discussion where you bring food, always bring food. That's like one of my top points. If you want parents and families to come, have food there, because that brings people together and it just makes them feel more comfortable. And at that time, have these conversations with parents, and it may take multiple conversations to get to what the information that you need. You're building trust here, you're building relationships. So having like a monthly dinner or something, it might take a while, but it's worth it.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Steve, what might your perspective be on that?
I think, and Amy, once again, has done a wonderful job of bringing some of those things up. One of the things we talk about in the world of restorative practices, and it's one of the things that's most visible, is the circle, right? And we talk a lot about how to facilitate that, with excellence, how to use that to push back against power imbalance and make sure that people that it's a safe and brave space where people can share what is going on. But I think the number one thing is open, honest discussions around not just some of the technical or logistical aspects of some of the struggles, if you will, but also being very intentional, and which aligns with the restorative mindset or way of being really intentional about talking about impact and talking about how people have been impacted by a situation. Not right, wrong, fault, blame, that type of stuff, but just literally saying, what has that been like for you? And creating spaces where people can share their narrative so that we can collectively start to talk about what does our ideal partnership look like? And I actually just kind of touched on a couple of different pieces there that I might share at a later question, but where we can create spaces where we have the opportunity to share, again, the narrative, the impact, and then co-create, co-construct what moving forward can look like in a way that is meaningful and powerful for all.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. Henry, I'll circle back around to see if we can hear your amazing perspective.
No.
We'll get it. We'll get it figured out. Awesome. Thank you both so much for sharing your perspective. So recognizing that we're a little bit ahead of schedule, I limited this question to one restorative practice, but we have time to think about maybe exploring a couple of more. So doing things with people really lifted in Amy's answer, involving the people that are most impacted by the decisions that we're making. And Steve, you mentioned using the circle process in multiple ways. What might be another restorative practice?
And Henry and I have been friends for a long, long time. And not to speak for him, but if I get into his kind of seat a little bit, I know that he talks quite a bit about using the restorative questions. And again, I'll answer from that, but I'm not sure if that's exactly where he would have gone with that. But that it's a discrete tool. It's the 5 questions: what happened, what were you thinking about, what's the impact been, what needs to happen to repair the harm, to make things right, to make things better. And that gets asked on both quote unquote sides, if you will. The people maybe who created the harm and the recipients of the harm, we get an opportunity to come together and talk about it. So it really leads to like a facilitated dialogue with questions that are the same questions each time, even questions that can be given to the participants ahead of time. So we're not even kind of going off the cuff with it. Everybody knows exactly what that process is going to look like. It's very simple. It's deceptively it's simple on the outside, but it's deceptively powerful. It asks just some basic questions like what the impact has been, and giving people opportunity to talk about that. So the use of what's called the restorative questions is a fantastic practice in this particular context.
Amy, do you have anything to add?
Mine is just kind of going to be a piggyback. I think that the reflection portion. It's just so important, reflecting after, the harm has been caused, the restorative practices have been done, and just coming back together and like thinking about it. How did that go? What worked? What are we going to do next time? I just think that reflection is just so powerful, and it's kind of like the part that people always kind of skip over.
Yeah, thank you, Amy and Steve, both of you. And there were some great questions and comments coming in the chat, kind of asking for more information about what that circle process looks like. There was a question about handouts. Yes, you will receive some resources as a follow-up for sure. And also, kind of, again, piggybacking off of what you and Amy shared, Steve, I'm thinking about the proactive use of the circle process as well, right? Recognizing we need to establish a foundation of trusting relationship before we can really show up to repair the harm in a way that's truly helpful. And so that same kind of structured circle process is great for building community and just learning about one another and likes and dislikes and our investment in the community. So yeah, just incredibly wonderful perspectives here. We're working on getting Henry's sound worked out so that you can hear his perspective as well. And we really appreciate your grace and patience as we work through this. So we will, again, circle back around to Henry once he's back and his sound is working. But in the meantime, we're going to move to the next question. Hi, Henry. I can see your mouth moving.
It looks like you're saying very profound things.
Absolutely. I know that to be true from being in Henry's presence. No. So there was in the registration information that we sent to you all, there was a question because we really wanted to hear from our audience about what you wanted to really learn about with an opportunity like this. And there was a theme that overwhelmingly came up in your feedback, and it's connected directly to this question. So Steve, we'll start with you. And the question is, what do healing and repair look like when we're engaging with families that have experienced historic, generational, ongoing marginalization and harm, especially thinking about that being at the hands of the system?
Yeah. I think one of the things that is, and we've alluded to it, or maybe even spoken a little bit directly to it already on this call, is just that it's not just this, oh yeah, some people had some bad experiences in the past. All right, I get it. It is so much more than that, right? And coming from a systems perspective, and obviously in my role, I do a lot of training and things like that. So kind of in the middle here a bit, if you will. But I literally have had people say, but I didn't do it. Like I wasn't the one that did that. So therefore, that dynamic, shouldn't be brought into the space. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? And maybe that's a harsh way of saying it, but that's just not the way people function, right? And this even gets into some equity work and some of those types of things, right? That if you don't give me a space to really share and just to listen and know some of the stuff that I'm going to say, this is about my interaction with this system, and you're representative of that system. So by very definition, some of the stuff I'm going to say, you're not going to like, right? And I have a responsibility to say it in a way that can be heard and it's not attacking or whatever it is, but still it's going to carry some weight. And there needs to be a space where we can, allow that to happen, right? And so I think ideally creating, a time and space where people can say, hey, this is what it's been like for me. Again, I'm jumping into some other pieces here, but we'll weave it together. I think a fantastic question for anybody representing the system and working with a family or family leaders is to say, what is this like for you? It is such a simple question, but it's such a powerful question which sets the stage for this dialogue. It opens up, first of all, it's paying attention to your lived experience, the impact, the emotional weight that's carried, that you are carrying just coming into this space or just being involved with this system, right? So what is this like for you? And allowing people to really share what's going on there. ideally, and we have to be very, very careful because of the power dynamic, but also as a person who's representative of the system to say, wow, I hear that, and here's some of the stuff, not in a, and now here's my rebuttal to those things. We have to be very careful not to do that. But yeah, and here's some of the stuff as a representative, but I care, that comes up for me, right? And so where we create space to be really, really clear about that. I do think, and it's another, kind of thing that I use. What does our ideal partnership look like? Again, a simple question, but be very intentional about digging into that. Now, when I say ideal, I'm not talking about nice and cute. I'm talking about ideal. Our time together, for this to be amazingly the best it could be, what would that be? What would that look like? Right? And then everybody gets a chance to talk about it. And then, we come back around, and say, so what were the benefits and what can we do to contribute to that? And what commitments do we make to that? In a sense, it's kind of like setting some norms, yes, but it's with a real intention on the emotionality, the impact, the actual stuff of relationships, right? Creating the time and the space for that explicitly and intentionally.
Thank you so much, Steve. Amy,
Mhm.
before I pass it over to you for your response to that question, we had a question come in through the Q&A that's really insightful and that could be helpful for our audience. And the question is, can we talk about or define what we mean by the system? And Steve, I'm wondering if you might be willing to tackle that.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because I also think, at least in my own experience, to be very honest with you and vulnerable here a little bit, um, I think the system is largely has a negative connotation, right? And so even just kind of saying system, people, can kind of sometimes, struggle with that a little bit, right? But I think of the educational, system, so schools and the power and the authority that comes along with that, right? Think of social service systems, right? That again have a tremendous amount of power. Again, kind of talking about a little bit of the kind of the stereotypical thing, oh, so and so has the power to come in and take our kids from us, right? And how that can be, put out there, right? And so they are institutions that have been given authority to be able to impact families and other people's lives, right? And so and again, I think there's even a larger system, which even, we could get into some of the details and the specifics of it, but a larger system that gives other subsystems the power to do this work, right? And so, um, you know, your title and who signs your check and those types of things are all, pictures of which system you're in and how you are operating, right? And so, I guess to kind of really sum that up, when I think of a system, I think of a group or an organization that has been assigned some degree of authority to really be able to impact the lives of others, and we need to handle that authority and that power very, very carefully, right, and with a lot of sober judgment and understanding of what that means.
Steve, that was super helpful. Amy, I'm gonna pass it to you, kind of in the context of the same question, thinking about marginalization and harm. There was a question that came in the chat that's connected that was asking, how can we help families that have been over-regulated by the system when we're trying to be inclusive with them? So I'm wondering if you, with all of your passion and experience, might be able to speak to that.
So I actually read that too, and what it made me think of is authenticity is so important and goes a long way. Authenticity and then transparency. When they have been overregulated, it gets to be too much. And just having staff that is authentic in what they're saying and is explaining things in a way that they can access goes a long way.
Thank you, Amy.
Mhm.
So with your passion for anti-racism work in your community, do you have anything to add about, what healing and repair look like when we're engaging with communities that have experienced that harm?
To me, healing, and repair looks like the authentic acknowledgement of the hurt that's been caused, coupled with solid plans to do better. Shared solid plans. What are you as an institution going to do in the next 6 weeks, in the next 6 months, and in the next 6 years to do better? Also, your staff should reflect your community. If you're in a predominantly
Bien,
Black
si
area,
estás,
sorry?
Sorry,
I
Amy,
think
go
that was
ahead.
related to, yeah, to interpretation there, yeah.
I was just saying that your staff should reflect your community and to go slow with clients. Take your time, build your relationships, answer their questions, build that trust.
I also think, Brooke, if I can just jump in here, I also think coming back and just checking in on how we are doing. You know what I mean? It's literally saying, again, a question that I use a lot. I'm really big on these relatively simple questions, right? That carry a lot of pack to them. And just how are we doing as a team? How are we doing in our partners? How are we doing together? Not just and again, it does include, are we hitting these benchmarks that we set out for, 6 weeks, 6 months, years or whatever down the road. Are we doing those things? Yes. But literally, we talk a lot in the work that we do at Akabin around community functioning. How are we actually doing this thing of being a community, or doing this thing of being in partnership, and being very intentional about checking in on that, right? Again, there's a lot of signs and a lot of things that get posted or get listed all kinds of places. And then sometimes it gets put in a drawer and we never see it again, right? And then we just kind of, so the real stuff of partnership, I think, really creates a space for that to happen when we say, how are we doing? Again, not just you, family system or family, judging, I don't mean judging in the negative sense, but really telling us how we're doing as a service provider, right? But how are we doing in our functioning as a collaborative, as a partnership, and being able to share what is working, what is not working, what is a bit frustrating, but I do see the benefit of it. So be patient with me as we work through this, those types of stuff, right? Those types of things, those dynamics that we like to use the phrase, we need to make the covert overt. Those are the type of covert dynamics that, if they're not made overt, can really tear apart the fabric of connection and relationship and partnership. So we have to bring it out there. I also say, how do you destroy the power of a secret? Is to make it not a secret anymore, right? So again, just a bunch of ways of saying we have to be able to put it out there, right? So that we can have honest, safe, brave dialogue around how this particular issue or dynamic or whatever is impacting our collective functioning.
So powerful. Thank you both. Henry, I see
Can you hear me now?
Ah,
Yeah.
yes, Henry, we can hear your wonderful voice. I'm so glad that you're back with us, that I know our panelists and audience are too. So we're going to circle back around and hear your perspective on, what's one restorative practice that folks can put into action.
Yeah, I think, and it was kind of touched on, I think, by Steve and Amy a little bit, but explicitly, one of the first things you can do when folks come together is really get to know each other. And a question would be, for both the administrators, the teachers, and the parents to have a conversation. Let's talk about, what was your experience in school, right? What was it like for you in school? What worked, what didn't work? And as we're now have this common interest, your child, what kind of environment, what norms do we need to set for how we engage each other, how we support this child in his or her education? As a parent, what feels like support to you coming from this school? And as administrators and teachers, what feels like support coming from the home. And lastly, invariably, there's going to be a conflict at some point. Let's establish how will we engage each other when there's some miscommunication or some problem arises. So it's not that the parent wins or the teacher wins or the administration wins, but the child wins. At the end of the day, when we're having conversation, do I feel good after I've blessed out the administrator, or do I feel good when I have diminished this parent? You know, what impact does that have on the child? Is the child good as a result? That would be my suggestion. And lastly, the restorative question cards. That's a great tool to use to help frame those conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you, Henry. And what's really resonating with me and what all of you have shared, and particularly with your example, Henry, is that that's applicable in every context, right? It can be school, it can be childcare, early learning, child welfare, healthcare, right? All of these system pieces that touch our children and families, that same exact frame can be taken. What was it like for you when? How do we work together to make sure that this child has what they need? So thank you so much. And then Henry, oh, Henry disappeared on me. That's okay. We have a question that came in from the chat that I'll lift, and then once Henry comes back, I'll circle around to the healing and repair question. So Amy, I'm wondering if you might be willing to take this one. You may have already seen it come through in the chat. So for someone who's a childcare professional, what's the best way to ask families about their experiences with the system to help engage them in their program?
I am a huge proponent for home visits. I just find them so bonding. They're such an honor to be invited into their home. And it really does kind of like set that stage for confidences, right? For like talking together and really, being able to talk about things that maybe they wouldn't be comfortable talking about in a classroom sitting in a tiny chair, So if you can, I would start doing home visits and just, when you talk to the parents when they come in to pick up their kid or drop them off, really authentic, eye contact, really authentic hellos and goodbyes go a long way.
Thank you so much, Amy. Henry, I see you're back.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I just want to make space for you to have the opportunity to also answer this really profound theme that came up for people, which is, what do healing and repair look like when we're engaging with families that have experienced historic and ongoing marginalization and harm? What might your perspective be on that?
Sincere listening and asking the question, what would you find helpful, right, to be able to move, to be able to get past this, right? What would be helpful?
Thanks so much, Henry. Everything that you all are sharing is really resonating with the audience. There's a lot of questions and comments that are coming in through the chat, so I'm just kind of reviewing some of these. So here's a question that I'll pose to you all, and whoever would like to jump in is welcome to do that. Is there a difference in your approach when working with individuals who are visibly marginalized, meaning race, physical disability, and those with invisible considerations, like intellectual disabilities or queer or part of the LGBTQIA plus community?
I'll take
So
a shot.
Brooke, what was the very, very first part of that? You said, is there a difference?
Yeah, is there a difference in our approach with folks who might have visible characteristics of marginalization versus invisible, if I'm hearing kind of the heart of that question correctly?
I think Henry, you were going to say
Yeah,
something.
I was just going to say, I think the process is the same. You recognize what is the challenge, right? What is the what might be a barrier, and just talking about that to begin with. What's been your experience up to this point? What have you found helpful? What's been challenging. And, on the administrative side, what you are able to do, there are some things that administrators and teachers are limited legally by what they can do. So we have to acknowledge that and, share that up front, right? So people have an understanding of both sides of the equation and then come up with the median, what will work.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
for me, I know, is it okay if I jump in, Brooke? Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, what is the difference, right? And, I think the direct answer is that, is there a difference? No, there's not. But I realize that might come across as insensitive. What do you mean? It's not the same issues, it's not the same dynamics. It's not going to land on people the same. And I understand that the way that we might carry some things out may look a bit different, if you will, but the spirit is going to be the same. And I'm not, that's exactly what, Henry just said. So I'm not going to, kind of go over that again, but we approach with curiosity, wanting to understand, the person's narrative and, what their experiences have been like. And so we can co-construct what our experience moving forward is going to look like, and so, I think as restorative practitioners, our job, right? And again, this is kind of looking at it from a systems kind of work perspective, but is to convene people and then in a very real way, confront everybody with our freedom and our power to be able to co-construct a future which is potentially distinct or different from the past, right? How do we change this, moving forward? Again, I want to say, very, very specifically, just because we sit in a circle and say talk, or you have a freedom to talk, it doesn't necessarily make people all of a sudden comfortable with talking, right? And so we need to be very, very mindful of what steps are needed to even draw people, into that. We talk about, we've been mentioned questions a number of times on this call, so maybe some of our questions are just a little bit easier to engage with, right? And then nothing builds confidence like success, right? So when we have an exchange that goes really well and feels good, even the way that we're hardwired to connect, when we have that experience that feels good, we want to engage even more. So we can start with some of those lower level things before diving into your full history of your involvement with the system, what do you do on a beautiful day, or something along those lines where we can touch base with our shared humanity and make some connections, build some of that confidence to move forward.
Thank you. Amy, we had another question come in from the chat that I'd love to pose to you. It says, what steps can be taken to improve parent engagement in programming when the capacity with themselves and their child is low? We have come to an issue with parent engagement even after offering supports, frequent check-ins, and one-on-ones, and that can really affect the progress for the child or the youth.
So, I mean, it goes without saying that parents have a lot on their plate all the time. And so as a parent, you're trying to constantly prioritize. One thing that seems to help is not having too many after school activities, too many events, like once a month is enough, and also personally inviting the parents, but also realize that just, parents are busy and you don't always know what else is going on. You can kind of do a survey to see what they're interested in, what they'd like to learn about. Our art night is always one of the most popular after, parent nights, because that's something that the kids can do, the parents can do. And then, like I said, always have food.
Amy, that is really resonating with so many people. And as we've all experienced, truly is an important aspect of building community and relationship, that shared meal and opportunity to connect. Another question, Steve and Henry, I'm thinking that this could be resonant with you all and kind of where you sit in the world. It says it's very important to do this work, but I think it can be very heavy for the practitioners, especially if participants are frustrated. How do you, as the folks on the system side, take it in and move forward without burning out?
Henry,
Uh,
would you like to?
yeah, in one of our trainings, we have these different statements that come up, and we ask people to share which one resonates with them. And one of the statements, I'm not quoting it, but it basically says, there are things, you can't do everything, but what you do well. And if you recognize that, if you're in a school where you're the only one that knows about restorative practice, you're the only one who's trying to do it. That is a very heavy place to be in. But for that 55 minutes of instruction, make it the most restored, make it the best part of your day and the day of the kids that are in front of you, and engage in those parents in a way that is restorative. If you have kids who, are always getting in trouble, look for the opportunities when they do catch them doing right and call home and tell the parent about that. Steve, really, he sat in his chair all day today. I didn't have to speak to him once. I just want you to know how proud I am of him. Parents don't get that call. Right? Help make them your ally.
Thanks, Henry.
Yeah, it says doing this work can be heavy on the practitioner. I would challenge the use of the word can, and I would say is heavy
Yes.
on the practitioner, right? It is. It's very difficult. Just like Amy had said, many things on the plate and pooled schedule and time and doing all of that. Representatives of those in the systems and administrators and all of that, and practitioners, experience a lot of that as well. In the work that I do with schools, one of the things that I like to say is a restorative student milieu flows from the abundance of a restorative staff community. Right? The experience of the student oftentimes flows from the connections that are in the colleagues and the people that are working within that system, right? And so I know we're talking about parent and engagement and working with parents, and that's what this is about. But I would also say, in terms of those that are working within the systems, we need to be intentional of doing this work with one another. We need to be restorative with one another. And so we are just doing what we do and living this out. And so, again, healthy communities, right, are generous and welcoming. And so when we are, as a staff, restorative with one another, then we reach out and with generous and welcoming and draw people in. And so absolutely, it's heavy. We don't do it alone. And we have to have a system in place that does not have fault blame, but that does allow for a tap out. If we need it. I've been doing this work for a long time. I'm sitting here talking about it like an expert, and I'm not going to say what it is, but there are some things that are kind of trigger me, right? And I'm a pretty laid back guy, but there's a couple things that I just feel like I get angry, right? Because of some of my past and doing all that. It's fine that that happens. I just need to not allow it to impact my practice or my work with somebody. So my other colleagues need to know situations where that might be a struggle for me, and I need to be able to go to them and say, "Hey, this is where I'm at right now." And be it maybe they step in, or be it they help me work through it, or whatever it is, but that I'm not dealing with that alone.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Mhm.
I'm keeping an eye on the time here, and we just have a few precious minutes left. And so I'm going to move us into our last question. We've talked about the why, we've talked about the what, and now let's get even more practical and talk about the how. So the question is, for our audience that's here today that might be watching this recording, what's one piece of advice that you would offer them about how to start putting these suggestions into practice today, tomorrow, in their partnership? So Henry, we'll start with you.
Get some restorative question cards, begin to use them and how you engage, how you have conversations with people. And that's really across the board. We're talking about parents with the administration, but parents use it with your kids use it with your parents, staff use it with your colleagues, administrators use it with your team. That would be my first suggestion.
Thank you. Amy, what about you?
I think that for me, it's access to shared humanity. You know, institution systems are built and run by people. And if you think about it, so are families, right? So focus on that shared humanity, and it's gonna lead you right.
Yeah.
You, Amy, that's so powerful. What about you, Steve?
Yeah. Yeah, I think really be, viewing the family as the expert on their family, right? And not us when we come along just to help them and not to have all the answers. But a couple of things just real quick. I'm looking at the time as well. If you're behind your desk, get out from behind your desk. All right. I'm not sure if people already understand that, but make a circle that does not have a table in the middle of it, right? And so set up your space as much as you can physically in a circle so that people can sit down and engage and talk with one another. Um, I just want to say this real fast, and I'm feeling a little bit bad because maybe I should have done this a little bit differently, but I just want to say there's this exercise that I call 5 questions for building community. I already said the first one, what does our ideal look like? Question number 2, and let me say it a little bit slowly. What benefits would we all receive if we achieve the ideal? So if we could act, so here's the ideal, right? And if we actually did that, what would we all get from that? What would be the benefits of that? Question number 3 is, what can you contribute to help us all achieve the ideal? Like, what is, like, not just your role, your jobs, but your passion, right? What could that look like? You operating as your authentic self, how could that help us, to do that? Question number 4 is, what doubts or what obstacles, what things could get in the way of us doing this? Let's have an honest discussion about that. And the final one is, what commitment that involves some risk? What commitment that's going to stretch you a little bit are you willing to make for us all to achieve the ideal? That is an exercise you can do at any time, at any place, not just at the beginning of your engagement with a family or a system.
That's so powerful. Thank you for that, Steve. And for the audience, we will engage with our panelists to pull together some resources for you all. So Steve, if you're willing to provide those questions for folks to be able to use, I'm going to move us to the end of our conversation. And I just want to thank you, Amy, Henry, and Steve, just first of all, for who you are. We're so grateful for your work, your passion and commitment, and just the incredibly valuable information that you've shared with us today. To our audience, we want to thank you for your thoughtful engagement and comments and your powerful questions, including the ones that we didn't have time to address today. As I mentioned, this team is going to follow up with the Q&A document and some other resources that were mentioned after today's webinar, and we invite you to watch for those via email. And again, just kind of pulling through some of these threads, doing things with people instead of to them or for them or not doing them at all. When you leave here today, just start with something that you've heard today. Involve the people that are most impacted by decisions, that are the experts of their own lived experience in what you're doing. And those are some really powerful places to start. All of that came from the wisdom of our panelists. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Sarah Zybert, Program Manager for the National Center for Family and Parent Leadership.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you so much, Amy, Steve, and Henry, for being our guest subject experts. Everything that you share resonated so much, and I feel will inspire all of us who were able to be together today. Brooke, thank you for expert facilitation, even through hiccups that happen with tech. You've all shared a wealth of information and insight with us today. As we close out, I want to encourage all of you to participate in the process of giving feedback about your experience with today's content of this webinar. Please take 1 minute to provide that input via our survey link, which will pop up as you close out of this webinar. On behalf of the Early Childhood Investment Corporation, the National Center for Family and Parent Leadership, we want to thank you all for joining today. You're taking that first step. You're going to leave here and do good things. We'd like to offer a special thank you to our panelists and to the Pritzker Children's Initiative for supporting this important work. Thank you all.